And hello everyone, it is Peter Sam the Narrow Gauge Engine here, and I'm feeling rather reflexive. Not only are we halfway through this series, but now all of the ranting and critiquing is over with, and I have to praise shit. Disgusting. I'll tell you something, my watch-throughs to make these videos have become all the more enjoyable though, so it's not all bad. Anyway, let's crack on and have a look at the best of the best when it comes to the Brenner era. Let's begin where all self-respecting list makers do, at Number 10, Love Me Tender. Starting off strong with an episode highlighting the Scottish twins' indestructible bond, and them in their natural habitat, the snow. The way Donald and Douglas's relationship is put to the forefront, and really takes a good look at it, is so interesting. This kind of concept has been done before, namely in Twin Trouble, but that was more focused on how badly the twins function without each other. Here it's about how the twins come to place their connection over their feud. Well, I say twins, but this is more so about Donald. Nevertheless, it's still incredibly sweet, and I find Donald being the protagonist rather refreshing and a nice change from Douglas in his major rescue operations. The way he also drops everything and goes to help Douglas when he realises he's in trouble is so sweet too. Of course, Douglas losing his tender isn't anything life-threatening, but that's kind of the point in my opinion. It doesn't matter that Douglas isn't in immediate danger, Donald will do anything to help. A true testament to his character. Other aspects of this episode that I enjoyed were how we have some suspenseful elements in there, with focus being drawn to the coupling between Douglas and his tender in 2 or 3 scenes. That's a trend you'll come to see with these episodes that made it the list, the suspense of it all. I love how well Donald and Douglas's arguing is presented too, because you can absolutely see it from both sides. Douglas has absolutely no say, and that's not fair, but Donald sees a way to help the engines of Sodor and wants to do so. Finally, before you all get bored of me going on about this episode, Douglas's line at the end, it's just, I can't put into words how heartwarming it was, so I'm just going to play it for you all now.
We'll soon get you warmed up again, Doogie.
Just knowing my brother came back for me has already warmed me up.
Aww. Number 9, Henry's Hero. Jumping back to season 17 for this one, and as much as it's had its fair share of bad episodes, some of which we've touched on very recently, this is not one of those episodes. In this one we get one of the most interesting and well thought out dynamics seen in the entire show. Henry with his new cautious personality, and Hero the old engine who continually desires to prove himself to show he can be really useful, coming together to face the obstacles of bad coal and heavy trains, which makes for an amazing watch. When faced with that bad coal too, both engines stick to their guns and do what they think is right, and they don't really fall out, which is a great way to take things. They characterise these guys really well here, even if Henry isn't exactly in his classic personality nowadays. What I like as well is Hero's initial determination. Whilst an admirable quality for both the other characters and the audience, it's merely a stepping stone for the true test of Henry's endurance, as he is faced with pushing a line of steel girders and a broken down Hero up Gordon's Hill. And he does it too, what a fucking lad. As with every episode structured with 2 unlikely characters meeting from this season, there is one character, Henry, who ends up learning more than the other. The same is true in Kevin's cranky friend. Cranky learns that sometimes it's okay to accept help, whereas Kevin doesn't really learn all that much considering he did everything right. But with Henry's Hero, I don't think that matters too much because of how admirable and sensible and how right everything feels. And whilst the keep on puffing motto is a bit overdone, I think it allows us at home to have a way to root for these guys, especially because they both have had their fair share of adversity over the years. I'm going to end this segment by throwing something in the air for you all, and I want to see what you think. Is it just me, or does the Henry Hero dynamic feel like the Brenner era Henry and the classic series Henry interacting in a weird way? Hero is an engine of great determination. I think that's the main takeaway from the episode, and I think classic series Henry can definitely be considered that. He battled through illness to pull trains multiple times, risked encountering what he thought was a ghost more than once for the good of the railway, and got his own back on some shithead kids for smashing his carriage windows. I'd say you'd have to have some pretty hardcore determination to be able to accomplish all of that. I'm not trying to say that Hero is the old Henry, they're both very different in a number of ways, but I am saying that there's a comparison to be made there, and I think it's very interesting to look at. Number 8, Not So Slow Coaches. From concept alone, this episode is incredibly strong, using a dynamic that's always there, but not really touched on that much, that being Thomas's dynamic with Annie and Clarabelle. It was sort of present in Blue Mountain Mystery, but it wasn't really that focused on. Thomas's clear care for them is just so sweet to see play out on screen, and his determination to get them back is not only admirable, but downright impressive. He goes across the island, even making a detour to Ulfstead Castle to get them back. That is impressive. I mean, he really could have just skipped the castle altogether and used his brain and gone, I could really just go to the drawbridge first and wait for Caitlin there. But Thomas was never really that bright, so I guess that I'd be expecting too much of him. There's also some quite amusing scenes added in there too, namely Caitlin challenging Connor to a race at Wellsworth, Annie and Clarabelle hoping and praying that Connor rejects the offer, only for him to accept. Despite all that though, despite the brilliant concept, the unique plot, the beautiful demonstration of character, and the amusing little snippets here and there is just one bit of this episode that bugs me, and it's Charlie. Him and Caitlin, who I also find to be a bit on the irritating side, interacting isn't very entertaining for me. And I will never be able to wrap my head around how Charlie doesn't realise he's shunting Annie and Clarabelle onto the back of Caitlin's coaches. Nobody laughs with their eyes closed whilst moving for that long, it's downright dumb. Although I'll forgive it because it leads to one of the most heartwarming chase sequences of all time in the series. I never thought I'd call a chase sequence heartwarming, I surprise myself sometimes. Anyway, let's move on to the next episode on the list. Number 7, Cautious Connor. Now I understand not everyone agrees with me on this one, but yet again I will try my damnedest to convince those of you who don't believe. I think this episode is very strong in terms of character and in terms of morals. Let's address character first. Stephen is an absolute legend in this episode. He takes on this sort of mentor role for Connor and does phenomenally with it, far from his ugly personality later on in the season and in the next one. This creates some absolutely brilliant scenes, such as when Stephen challenges Connor to a race and takes the piss out of him in an effort to get him feeling his old self again. He even brings up some nice historical detail about engines exploding, which is always appreciated. Anyway, regarding Connor, I think this episode is the big one for his character. There are better episodes with him as the lead, which I shall be bringing up later, but this one makes him lose the one thing we all know he loves to do, which is go fast. And why is that? Because he has too much care and concern for what could happen to his passengers if he goes fast after breaking down. This is one of the reasons I love Connor. He just comes across as so genuine and so considerate and just an all-around decent bloke. What a lad. This leads into the moral aspect of the episode and how Connor's worry manifests into almost paranoia. I don't want to label it as that because I'm not entirely sure if it qualifies, but if not, I'd say it's close to it. It creates a very interesting moral about how you shouldn't let one bad experience spoil things, which is just as applicable to us as the 5-year-olds. In the end, upon rewatch, I do think it's not as good as I thought it was about a year ago, but I still think it more than deserves to be on the list and is definitely the best that season 20 has to offer, in my opinion. Number 6, Old Reliable Edward. Back to season 18 again, and oh boy, what an episode. I think it's safe to say that this episode is as close to the classic series of Thomas that we've ever seen in the Brenner era, with that familiar style of dialogue and narration in full swing. We even get a nice homage to Edward and Gordon, with a scene of Edward pushing Gordon up the hill and questioning if he even gets a thank you, which seems to be a direct callback to the line from that season 1 episode where the narrator notes that Gordon didn't even say thank you. I do quite like that line being referenced. It's one of those blink and you'll miss it type references that's very satisfying to find. Sorry if I spoiled finding it for you. Old Reliable Edward hasn't just got its callbacks and style to help it though, because we get another strong dynamic brought to the forefront, that being Thomas and Gordon. Yes, I guess this is kind of another callback, but then I think every reused dynamic could be considered that, and I'm not about to start saying that saving Edward is a direct reference to Thomas and the trucks. Anyway, the dynamic in this episode is a great one, with Thomas getting one over on Gordon by stranding him on his hill. And that great POV shot of Gordon watching Clarabelle smugly be pulled over the hill is just absolute gold. I love it. What a great callback episode with a strong style, and despite that abrupt end to it all, it's still worthy of being in this top 10. Now we come to my favourite segment, the honourable mentions. The episodes that still did amazingly well but just missed out on being on the list for one reason or another. Let's start with one of the best season 19 episodes for a lot of people, Toad and the Whale. This episode is so unique and it stands out way above the other episodes from the season, barring one or two. Toad's connection with the whale is so adorable and heartwarming, and whilst it's not quite the same as other sweet relationships in the Brenner era like Donald and Douglas's, there is that moment when the whale is set free and waves at Toad with its tail. Now that is some shit that's gonna make me sob. What's more, the ideas Toad expresses to others across the episode are genuinely clever and inventive, leading him to becoming more likeable because of that. Then we hit that one bit that just irks me, just really gets under my fucking skin. Would Oliver really disregard his friend's ideas for no reason? Well, there could be a reason that Oliver's a massive narcissist and believes nobody can be better than him, but he already had that arc in season 3, so if that is the reason, it's a bit backwards really. Also, I really just can't believe that Oliver would treat Toad with so little respect. These guys went through thick and thin, risking life and limb together, and you're telling me that Toad never had a good idea during that time. That doesn't even matter, to be honest, because of the closeness these two should feel, it just isn't there in this episode. However, it is a common trend between the two, seen also in Toad's Adventure, and it's not an outrageous character choice for Oliver to be a bit up himself, so all in all, I still think it's really strong. Next up is The Switch from Season 17. Why this episode is good lies simply in its narrative. It's so interesting to watch these polar opposite engines of Luke and Millie swap jobs and see how they handle things. The rowdy and rambunctious Luke learns how to take things slower, and the graceful and elegant Millie learns how to be stronger and tougher. Like Henry's Hero, it's a nice one for character dynamic, and whilst they aren't interacting for most of the time, they still learn a lot from one another while doing each other's jobs. My one issue with this one, and why it didn't make the list, is down to how forced the narrative feels when it comes about. The argument Luke and Millie get into just seems very contrived, and it doesn't feel like much thought went into it to make it feel natural. It's my only real issue, although it is strange how the Thing Controller just agrees to let the Earl take one of his engines. Getting deadbeat dad vibes from him, can't lie. Finally, let's hop back over to Season 20 for the final time in this video to discuss the railcar and the coaches. If there's one thing I'm sure you've realised I enjoy by now, it's a good dynamic, and this episode has a really strong one, that being between Daisy and Annie and Clarabelle. I love the role reversal that occurs here, with Daisy being initially horrible to the coaches, so to get their own back, they become just as horrible back, but in a much more psychological manner, telling Daisy they're hearing weird noises coming from her. Not only does it show us the more vengeful and intelligent sides of Annie and Clarabelle, it is really entertaining because Daisy's amazing. She's melodramatic and snooty, and all of those character traits that make for those characters you just want to see get the worst luck ever. She's the best part of this episode, which unfortunately just didn't make the cut. Now on to number 5, Bill or Ben. You may be surprised to see a Bill and Ben episode from this era on the list, considering I slated most of the episodes they appeared in really badly in the top 10 worst list. But I believe this is Bill and Ben done right, and why I think this is because their entire nature has changed. The trick they pull on Connor is pretty harmless. Yes, Connor almost crashes, but it's not on the same level as what they put Timothy through in the later seasons. They weren't trying to make Connor crash. Yes, they were very uncaring about it afterwards, but hell, these are Bill and Ben we're talking about. They will always be a little douchey. All they wanted to do was make Connor think there was an engine faster than him, just pure innocent mayhem, and that is how these guys should have always been written. What's more, I find the dynamic at play here between Bill, Ben and Connor so good because we have the trickster twins up against a genuine, if a bit gullible, Connor. But I think the true beauty of this episode lies within its ending, where Bill and Ben's trickery is shown in full, with them managing to get around to Topham's solution of painting one twin blue by having the other manipulate. Fuck. So yeah, this episode does have a bit of manipulative behaviour in it, but it's nothing compared to No Steam Without Coal, or No Help at all. Plus, it's only Kevin, who is so easily persuaded that they probably didn't need to bother at all. What this part of the episode does do though, is demonstrate the intelligence Bill and Ben have, and even though the workman that had to paint the same engine twice would surely realise, the entertainment value is much greater because there's no tormenting behaviour or malicious intent. It's just good fun at the end of the day, with a perfect depiction of these twin engines. Number 4, the fastest red engine on Sodor. I think the most obvious thing with this episode is that the person who wrote this, Helen Farrell, loves James, or at least understands James really well. The whole thing is a testament to the character with callbacks, references, other shit like that. The opening sequence that flits between James and Toby not only contrasts them and highlights the main problem of the episode, but is a great reference to their dynamic in earlier seasons. It's also pretty funny. Toby's yell helped a lot there. We also have Emily's foreshadowing of the events that would come to occur later in the episode, and a more direct callback to The Adventure Begins with James's accident. Considering that was his first appearance way back in season 1, and this episode also has that prominent runaway and crash due to his brakes, it's hard to ignore the parallels. Then we come to Rosie. Bringing her back with this new look to represent the change in her character from just being Thomas's friend or fangirl is great. She really feels like herself now as opposed to just living vicariously through our number 1. Anyway, switching back to James, I feel like he is very relatable in this episode and definitely paints him to be flawed, but not really unlikable. I mean, he did smash up the shed which led to Edward leaving the steam team, but ignore that whole thing. James thinks his problems disappear and doesn't want to have to deal with it, and I find that really relatable, to be honest. There's also some great suspense in there with us seeing the brake fluid dripping from James in various shots. Really well done. Not as well done as the entire runaway though, that is probably one of the best runaway sequences in the whole franchise. Close to being the best. You'd still need to convince me why Thomas the Jet Engine's runaway isn't superior. This one still has such magnificent music, cinematography, and that final crash has so much impact though. There's so much I could mention with this one, but you may have noticed that another season 21 episode hasn't appeared on the list before this episode like it should have done. Well, as much as I do love this episode, my new favourite Season 21 episode is number 3, Springtime for Diesel. Now I'm just going to get this bit out of the way first, because when I remembered this fact and then confirmed it, it just made the episode better for sheer iconicness. Iconicity? Nah, iconicness. Anyway, Daisy is voiced by Tracy Ann Oberman, and if you don't recognise that name or you're not from the UK, then I am so excited to possibly show someone this clip for the first time or help someone make that connection, because oh my god, watch this.
Now you know what it's like to lose the one thing in the world you love most. Now you know what it's like to be one of us. Now you know what it's like to be me!
How iconic is that? That's her, that's the woman. Anyway, onto the episode itself. As much as the previous episode we mentioned was sort of like James's swan song, this is that but for Diesel. My guy finally unlocks empathy like it's an Xbox achievement, and his dynamic with Daisy is so interesting throughout. In the classic series, these two never interacted. In the hit era, I think they were in the same shot once for one of the specials, can't remember which one. But now they're fully talking and their interactions are spectacular, and even when they're apart we get beautifully written scenes where Diesel's guilt builds up until he can't take it anymore. This leads to my favourite scene in the entire Brenner era, when Diesel goes and speaks to Daisy while she's asleep hanging from the rafters of the Diesel Works. The beauty of Diesel just pouring out all of those thoughts, feelings, and all of that built up guilt is just so touching in a way that's so real, and in a way that we've never really seen with this show before. It's always been realistic, but never gone quite that far before, and I think it pulls it off, to be honest. I think one of the best things an episode can do is have things you notice on rewatch to keep things fresh for the audience, and this episode did that for me. Firstly, all of the big characters that have prominence to the narrative are Diesels, and despite there being an episode in the same season that has Diesels take over the jobs of steam engines, even that episode didn't have an exclusive Diesel cast. And again, I must praise the writer, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but Davey Moore, I have to praise him for having the balls to basically kick the steam engines to the curb on this one, with I think only Thomas and Percy sneaking in, but that's to be expected. Me and Mr. Moore have always had a strenuous relationship, entirely one-sided by the way. He's also produced utter shit, and then pulls this out of his arse at the last second. Like, who was your ghostwriter, or did you just choose to make crap for the last 4 seasons? As well as this, Dart's line responding to Daisy's Merci Beaucoup where he says Merci Big Poo to you is just hilarious. Never noticed it before, but it's brilliant, just like the rest of the episode. It has heart, it has realism, it's got beautifully written characters and scenes, it's funny, it has built up Diesel's character more than ever before. That is how you make one S-tier episode, and I'm glad Davey Moore managed to finally make an all-time great one. Number 2, Last Train for Christmas. One of the best Christmas episodes and one of the best episodes of the season. This one is aesthetically perfect and definitely one of the most whimsical feeling episodes out there. This episode has everyone: Duck, Diesel, Harold, Hero, the fucking slip coaches. It really leans into that great community spirit vibe, which, as you may know when it comes to Christmas episodes, I absolutely love. To me, everything seems so well thought out here. Even the ongoing gag about everyone thinking Harold is Santa has payoff in the end, with Thomas saying Merry Christmas to who he thinks is Harold, only for it to end up being the real Santa. It's a weird thing to include and takes away from the realism this era tries so hard to capture, but I'll let it off. After all, it's nowhere near the forefront of this episode, is it? It's just a little side gag. Sir Topham also having a change of heart about helping Connor's last train when he sees a random family hugging on the platform of Knapford is so cute as well. It's just a nice little moment in there that really makes him feel like a human and not just the engine's boss. Some people complain that this episode has too much narration, but I disagree, to be honest. I think it has the perfect amount. Even if it was narration focused, I wouldn't mind, because then it'd feel like someone telling you a Christmas story whilst tucked up in bed, giving it that cozy quality. And of course, there's that over-dramatised moment where one of the coaches overruns the platform, which is a bit unnecessary, but then again, I don't think it does anything actively atrocious, so I'm not about to complain too much about its harmless little existence. This episode is brilliant, and a true strong one of the era, with the music, snow, and lighting all creating this brilliant aesthetic, the narrative providing an epic tale of battling the elements, and even amusing little quips that we can enjoy too. Most of all, this episode has heart, with Connor doing whatever it takes to get his passengers home. Simply adorable. But there's one episode in the whole Brenner era that beats it in my opinion. What is that episode? Well, if you wait 2 seconds, I'll tell you, jackass. Number 1, Slow Steven. Words cannot describe how cool I think this episode is. What I think it masters the most, and is so brilliantly done in my opinion, is the suspense. Suspense hinges on getting a lot of elements right, and it's trickier to do than you might think. It's because pacing has a lot to do with it, and that is one of the hardest things to be able to do, with a story, whether you're writing it, editing it, etc. But this nails it. It perfectly captures the bomb under the table idea, where the audience know that the bridge is collapsing and will tumble to the depths below, but the characters don't know. And the audience don't know what build-up may make these events more serious. Anyway, enough of that, let's talk about Stephen again for what, the 50th time now? In this episode, his quaint charm makes for a rootable protagonist, especially when coupled with his quick wit, which I love him for. His dynamic with Gordon is strong, and whilst rather similar to Toby's, at least Stephen has a bit of a bark about him. And plus, by the episode's end, after the phenomenal suspension bridge collapse, Stephen gets his own back through typical mockery. Plus, we even get some new information about him, that being that he gives tours of the island to guests. Whilst nothing amazing, it's a nice little detail that fleshes out his character a bit more. Finally, I think one of the best aspects of the episode is that Thomas gets shoved aside for once. Season 19 is very Thomas oriented. He appears as the protagonist in half of the episodes and has prominent roles in most of the others too. Though in this episode, despite him appearing and being the one to once have warned Gordon, Stephen tells the fame-hungry bastard to fuck off because this is his episode and he's not having any of that bullshit on his watch. It's just nice to see someone else take the reins for a change, and what an episode to take the reins with, eh? Truly a superb episode, and in my opinion, the best of the Brenner era. Well, that's the list done. Goodbye again, Brenner era. I'm sure I'll find something else to mention about you soon. And it's goodbye to you guys as well, as until the next video, this is it for me. Be sure to leave your list in the comments below as to what your personal rankings are, and thank you for watching. Until next time, I've been Peter Sam, you've been you, and... What? What's going on? What's happening here? Hello? Daisy the diesel rail car? What do you want? Wait, play my intro to the audience again? Why? What's gonna happen? Okay, well this is what Daisy wanted, so here you go.
Now you know what it's like to